In a society filled with human innovation, one invention stands out above them all. The one that has become the obsession of the modern world. Money. Money was not just an invention, it was a mental revolution. It created a system of trust, an elaborate tie that binds us all together. It connected the world, sending merchants across continents in search of far-off riches. Exchange was the engine that drove the progress of civilization, and money was the fuel. It allowed us to specialize, turning hunters into blacksmiths, artists, soldiers, and kings. Money is what made the world modern. We have taken it to dizzying levels of complexity, from gold coins to bits of information stored in the cloud. The history of money is the history of us. Every coin, stone, and shell a symbol of what we have valued, who we have served, and how our cultures evolved. It has become a language that all humans speak. This is the story of how money made us modern, how it opened the globe and spread ideologies, transforming the ancient world into a complex civilization of merchants, mercenaries, industrialists, and billionaires. This is Origin.
Wow. Smiles everywhere. How you
Jason,
doing?
you know, I could interview you, I could ask you questions, but I think we're just going to put you on the spot and fire off a shot of awe. Go ahead, Jason. Go.
See you later.
Jason,
What's going on?
Origins, the journey of humankind.
Yes.
What made you want to go back to the beginning?
Well, I think it gives us definitely a sense of perspective, right? To look at how we became who we became. I have a big interest in technology. I travel all over the world and I do a lot of speeches about the future of technology. Are we going to merge with machines? Is artificial intelligence going to become a part of human intelligence? You know, I'm into like transhumanism and the singularity and all these crazy ideas. And oftentimes people have this aversion to the technologized future, right? Like us merging with machines. People are like, I don't know if I'm into this. This is somehow fundamentally unnatural. But what I think is so great about this show is that it gives us a sense of deep time and a sense of perspective, and it's revelatory, right? And we come to realize that our relationship with technology goes back a very long time.
Well,
and
essentially our relationship with innovation.
Very much so. I mean, we essentially, I think what Kevin Kelly from Wired magazine likes to say is that we essentially created ourselves. We domesticated ourselves with our tools and technologies. One of my favorite philosophers is a media philosopher called Marshall McLuhan, and he's known for a very famous quote called it goes like this: first we build the tools, and then the tools build us.
But that can be viewed in two ways, right?
Okay.
That can be viewed in a sort of positive perspective,
Yeah.
which I think you take on that.
Yes.
And the other perspective on that could be the tools
unintended.
don't build us, the tools play us, like Terminator 2, right? You know.
Well, yes. I mean, technology, I think, has always been a double-edged sword. You can use fire to cook your food, and you can use fire to burn the village next door. You can use the alphabet, perhaps the most powerful information technology we've ever created, to compose, Shakespearean sonnets. But you can use the alphabet also to create hate speech, propaganda, and fake news, and you know what that leads to. So all technologies, as Marshall McLuhan says, extend and amputate. They do both, and it's all a matter of how we use them. But I think looking at the transformative effects that these technologies have had in shaping our very humanness, I think gives people this an amazing perspective that I think equips us to better be able to deal and interpret the changes that are coming. So by going back to the beginning, we can have a better sense of where we're going, if that makes sense.
To get a better sense of where we're going, is that because you're going to be discussing, or you discuss how people responded to those tools as they began to change and how people started to evolve with the tools?
Yeah, well, I think more than anything to realize that we have a symbiotic relationship with these tools. So our very first episode on Origins was called the spark of life, the spark of civilization. It was about fire. So fire was game-changing. There's a very famous book called Cooking Made Us Human. And this very much inspired the episode and builds on this theme that we build a tool and the tool builds us. When human beings first domesticated fire, when human beings were first able to cook for the first time, this was essentially an external stomach, a prosthetic, artificial piece of technology, a technological stomach that pre-digests every meal. By cooking food, we make the meal more energy efficient, more bioabsorbable. And so we stay full for longer. Before cooking, we spent most of our free time chewing, just chewing raw food. Once we could cook, it's straight up.
Imagine, I've been chewing all day.
Yeah.
How can I not chew anymore?
Yeah. Once we could cook, our brain actually grew because we were getting so many more nutrients. The food, that every meal was more absorbable. But also, we stay full for longer. So then there's leisure for the first time. From leisure comes arts and crafts and culture. And most people don't think about it, but without cooking, humans as they exist today would not have come about. And that's where that whole book, Cooking Made Us Human, when we look at in the episode, we created fire, but then fire created us.
When you talk about leisure, you can fast forward now to the past decade, and
Yeah.
you talk about the iPhone, and you talk about even more leisure time
Yeah,
that comes with
definitely.
that, and the way that we communicate at this point creates even more leisure time and more communication, and our brains adapt to that. But my question in regards to that is, as our brains adapt, do you think our fundamental human nature changes?
Yes. I mean, I just think that there's this other idea people talk about when human beings started creating stone tools for the first time. After a couple generations, our jaws physically shrank. So there's this physiological relationship, right? We had these stone tools. Maybe we could mash up stuff before we cook it, before we eat it, and so we didn't need those big jaws anymore. And so, evolution does its job and things adapt. But it's the fact that our cultural and technological artifacts and our evolution has this feedback loop that then in turn changes our physiological evolution. So there's a symbiosis in place. And, to go even more heady on this idea, there's a famous book that I adore by a cognitive philosopher called Andy Clark. And what he says is that we need to get over what he calls our skin bag bias. What do I mean by skin bag bias? This assumption, this flawed assumption that we end at the edge of our skin tissue and that everything that's outside of us is somehow unnatural, right? And the key idea here is that we come to be, the human mind as it exists today, emerges in the feedback loops between brains, tools, and environments. That part of our thinking occurs outside the brain. When you write something down, part of your thoughts pour over into the page. Then you read your own thoughts on the page, and they change your future thoughts. And there's this feedback loop that's going on.
Enter the new flesh.
Very much so. I mean, these guys also co-authored a paper called The Extended Mind Thesis, which is about the smartphones in our pockets. I mean, these are our appendages, our technological appendages. If you drew the Vitruvian Man today, you guys know that famous drawing of the ideal man. The Vitruvian Man today would have a smartphone in his hand, and you would point to it as if it was a part of his anatomy. Like, this is a part of who we are. Part of our thinking occurs through it. We communicate with other people in the form of technological mediation. Amber Case, the cyborg anthropologist, calls these technosocial wormholes. Every time you make a telephone call, you see somebody's face on a FaceTime call. That's a wormhole that folds space and time so that mind-to-mind communication can occur. So, I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself, but the key idea here is that we are distributed. Human beings are distributed between biological and non-biological props and scaffoldings.
And you can actually backtrack that. I
Yeah.
mean, you can go all the way back to fire, but
Yes.
you can actually, the phone is just the new tool that we talk about that it's done that with. What you're talking about sounds to me like Videodrome, the Cronenberg movie, where it's mostly based off of Marshall McLuhan text, and it's about how the TV and the video stream sort of recreate the flesh and adapt the mind in regards to the tool.
Absolutely.
So you can kind of, and then you can go back to film, you can go back to the radio. These conversations have been happening in regards to innovation since fire.
Yes, you got it. I mean, you talk about film. Film, I think, is one of the most advanced communication technologies we've ever created. There was this book called Expanded Cinema by a guy called Gene Youngblood, where he says that cinema reflects mankind's historical drive to manifest his consciousness outside of his mind in front of his eyes. Like, cinema is a technology for intersubjectivity. It allows us to step into the mind of another, right? There's this thing that happens when you become immersed in cinema called the deictic shift. The deictic shift is when you assume the viewpoint of the other character. What does that mean? You step into their shoes. You're no longer seeing the world through your eyes, you're seeing the world through their eyes. But where does that term deictic shift come from? When early hominids would go hunting, you and me are in the woods together, and I all of a sudden look over there, and then I look at you, and then you look where I'm looking. Now you're assuming my viewpoint. You've seen what I've seen, and now we're going to go hunt together. So the original term for deictic shift, again, is you assuming my viewpoint. That extends to cinema, because we get to step into somebody else's shoes. Cinema consciousness meets its own process with cinema. Cinema is a reflection of how our mind works more than anything else. So that's a communication technology. But where did that originally begin? It began when we started drawing hieroglyphics on stone tablets or on cave walls, or making little sound vibrations to encode the contents of our mind in a symbolic auditory technology that was the first wireless technology, right?
Started communicating our consciousness out loud via graphics or...
Insane. I mean, language is a psychedelic and synesthetic technology, right? It takes visual information, it converts it to auditory sound vibration, and it transmits those without cables from mind to mind. Kevin Kelly, who wrote What Technology Wants, says that the emergence of language, and we have an episode on language and origins, was the first technological singularity. If you draw a line in the sand to humans pre-language and humans post-language, the world post-language would have been inconceivable, unimaginable to early hominids on the other side of that line pre-language. It's like a wetware upgrade. Without language, there is no imagination. Without language, there is no pre-planning or pre-designing, right? I mean, he says language is like a magic mirror that reveals to the mind what the mind thinks. There is no self-awareness without language to formulate a way of looking at yourself to begin with.
You can't talk to yourself.
No, exactly.
You have no idea what you're imagining or what you're thinking if you can't define it.
Exactly. You live in the dumb now, as other animals do, which some people say is blissful, right? Ignorance is bliss.
Well, I have a question. Let's backtrack. Let's go.
Yeah.
I mean, not all the way back to the creation of fire. We did that already.
Yeah.
Let's move up a little bit further. How did all this start? Where did this begin for you? Not the show, but you becoming.
So I was seeing my therapist. She's like, "You got issues."
She was like, "Okay, keep talking. Let me get a camera, put it right here, maybe a green screen behind you."
Yeah, that's exactly. I'm lying on the couch doing stream of consciousness psychoanalysis, and she's like, "We should videotape this and send it to imagery," and thus my videos were born.
When did you find that you had an interest and also the ability to sort of retain this information and a voracious hunger for it as well?
So I went to school for philosophy and film down in Miami, University of Miami. And philosophy and film was, the impractical passions that I had. I was like, I want to make content media or movies about philosophical ideas. And then I read this quote by, I think it was Timothy Leary, who said, in the information age, you don't teach philosophy, you perform it. And that if Aristotle were alive today, he'd have a talk show or a YouTube channel or Facebook Live. The point being, thinking out loud is very powerful. That's how the Greeks used to do it, right? They used to get together, have these insane salons, like some psychedelic herb, and Dionysian something. So I went to school for philosophy, and I wanted to combine those two loves. And it just so happened that the tools at the time were just coming online in the sense that you could make your own content, you could edit your own media with very little money, right? So the barrier of entry was lowered. It also made it harder to get noticed because everybody could do it, but it was a way very quickly for me to be able to transcribe my curiosities and obsessions and put them on media. It was a way to eternalize transient inspiration.
When was the moment when you decided to put yourself on video and to do this? I mean, I know Shots of Awe came later. You had already had Brain Games on Nat Geo, and you started doing these.
So here's how it started. When I was in film school, I did a 14-minute documentary that looks a lot like what my Shots of Awe look like today. It was about reconciling hedonism and spirituality. the ethic of pleasure and the ethic of transcendence. Can pleasure lead to transcendence instead of self-denial, which is normally what we're told? Fast for 40 days and then you'll see the divine. And I was like,
that's the typical college kid who's trying to
justify his lifestyle.
Yeah, justify getting fucked up all the time.
Yeah, thank you. So the head of programming.
Is me being drunk every night possibly spiritual? And can I tell my parents that?
Thank you. I mean, that's exactly how the guy that gave me my first job at Current, his name was David Newman, lovely head of programming, he thought the same thing. He loved the film. He loved that there was a voice behind it. And he was like, you're full of shit, but good job at making your case. But I think it just revealed that I was a seeker, right? And so I was hungry. I had a fire in the belly. And I was like, more than anything else, just like language reveals to the mind what the mind thinks, this media became a way to hold a mirror up to myself, to reveal myself to myself. Writers feel the urge to write, painters feel the urge to paint, composers, they got to get that melody out of themselves. And for me, it just happened to be stream of consciousness, And I just to give myself some self-justification, there was a study recently on freestyle rap and creativity, where they did fMRI scans on freestyle rappers, brain scans, versus people reciting memorized lyrics. And what they found is that freestyle rappers, just like jazz musicians when they're improvising, their lateral dorso-prefrontal cortex goes quiet. That's the self-editor. That's the excessive self-consciousness and rumination that normally keeps us from taking a chance in life. When that goes quiet, that inner chatter silences, you experience it as liberation. You're in the zone, you're in the flow, you lose your sense of self, you lose your sense of time, right? And you feel like you're channeling. Everybody's experienced that, whether it's an athlete in the zone. And so this is like the neuroscientific justification for something that I just intuitively realized with my love of media. So I got the gig at Current TV, and I was there for 5 years. And I continued to just have this urge to make my own content. And that's when I started doing the shots of awe, or as I called them then, philosophical espresso shots. And the key idea was that if I got wound up enough, if I got myself into a state of reverie, in the zone, there was usually a lot of information that was coming in. When you're inspired, the writer will talk about sitting there where the words come through you but not from you, and though they are with you, they belong not to you. For me, it was that, but verbal. And I just decided that in that process of letting go, I also would let go of my own ideas after they came out of me, and so I wanted to film them. I wanted to document them. And I was doing that since high school, hosting salons with my friends where we'd interview each other about key ideas when we were slightly out of our heads. And we had different techniques of ecstasy to get ourselves out of our heads.
What's your technique now?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot, but one thing that I can say that... Okay, how about this? Carl Sagan, who I'm a huge fan of, and he's the astronomer known for cosmos, he had this kind of reverence for the infinite, for the cosmos, this contemplative ecstasy. He used to love cannabis. That was his herb of choice. My friends Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel have just written a book about creativity and ultimate human performance called Stealing Fire, sort of the Promethean idea of stealing fire from the gods, storming heaven, so to speak. And it's about the various techniques of ecstasy that human beings have used to get out of their heads in order to tap into the great beyond, right? Whether it's fasting for 40 days or doing yoga or doing meditation or eating psychedelic mushrooms or smoking herb, human beings have a relationship with altered states of consciousness that goes back thousands of years. And so I say, whatever floats your boat as long as you're not hurting anybody else. But our hunger for that metaphysical dimension of human experience persists even in our hyper-rational scientific age. We want to experience subjectively something that is beyond ourselves and in spite of ourselves, and that is the inspiration for my work and for my explorations. I mean, I'm interested in consciousness. I'm interested in mediating consciousness and in having some kind of stewardship of internal life. Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to hack happiness. Well, that begins with having a knobs and levers approach to consciousness. Right, like a DJ controlling your own experience, like stage designing the movie in your head. And how do we do that? Well, through experimentation, and that's what I've been doing with my work. I mean, that's what feeds my hunger to make media, is really my hunger to steward the contents of my inner world.
All that said, I want to say that I think I took an unfair shot at your film that you made in college. If you go back and look at my student films, I'm sure it paints a fairly disturbing portrait of an intoxicated young man as well at the time.
Cool.
So you go into making Origins
Yeah.
now, right? You've been doing brain games for a few years. Origins is a much bigger project. You know, these recreations that they did of the first man sort of building fire and coming up with language. These beautiful recreations. What was it like being a part of a project like this?
It was amazing. So, I did Brain Games for 5 seasons, and that was my first experience of being on a successful TV series. I did 5 years of current TV and never quite broke through and made any noise. I didn't know what it
went away.
Yeah, current went away. But Brain Games, nominated for an Emmy, broke some number records for Nat Geo. So it was nice to be part of something that people love, kids, parents, everybody. And so after 5 seasons of that, we went on hiatus, and Nat Geo was like, we're doing this new project. Turns out the creator is a guy called John Boswell. You might know him as Melody Sheep. He used to do those Symphony of Science videos on the internet where he auto-tuned scientists. Brilliant guy. He came up with this concept of retelling the story of humanity with his visual style, and he's a composer, and he sold it to a production company. Well, he got the production company to sell to Nat Geo. Nat Geo loved it, and then Nat Geo was like, why don't we get Jason to do this? He's on hiatus from Brain Games. And because I knew John Boswell, we had worked together in the past, it was just a perfect marriage and a perfect synergy. And the historical recreations of the show, just to give you an example, we take you back. Like, aside from my role as host and trying to channel my inner Carl Sagan, there's also these like cinematic recreations of these key moments in history where you feel like you're watching a movie. I mean, like serious visual, mind-expanding content. 75 days they shot in South Africa. So it's like serious visuals. We call them vignettes. And then every episode also has 4 of these symphonies, which look a lot like my shots of awe. And the symphonies are what me and John Boswell created together, where I kind of do my thing, set up and unpack the episode, tell you what you're going to see, do everything we can to get you excited. Do we care about those?
No.
Okay. It's New York City. There's a fire truck. But anyway, so we set it up with these like super visual symphonies, and then we kind of throw you into the movie, and then you're there to relive these recreations. And then I come back in and tell you what's going on. But yeah.
Let's talk about perspective again, because I know the show has been in the works for about at least a year.
Yeah.
Right? It takes a long time to make television.
Yeah.
But it feels like culturally we are suddenly hungrier, maybe it's just me, for perspective all of a sudden, historical perspective, be it politically or geographically or even just sort of technology and innovation, because it seems like suddenly we're out of control or things are moving too quickly and we're not really sure how that's happening or how we got here. And everyone's looking for some sort of touchstone to be like, we've been here before, or this is how it's always been.
Definitely. I mean, history always gives us great perspectives. 100 years ago, I think 80% of the jobs in this country were farm jobs. Today, it's less than 1%, and they produce who knows how much more yield. But the point is, there have been disruptions where technology has changed and people's jobs have had to transform. The difference is that because these changes are happening exponentially, and I'll explain the difference between linear and exponential change, it used to happen over a generation or two, or over many generations. So you didn't feel it within your own life. Your kids were born into a different world, but you, for the most part, were assured that your world was going to stay largely the same. And that's kind of comforting to people, because change is disruptive. Change is scary. Change could be a tiger in the jungle that's all of a sudden going to come out of the woods and eat you. I mean, it disrupts the status quo. But the reason that now, we're having these like unintended reactions to these disruptions, the fear of change, which then makes people act in ways that are against their own self-interest sometimes, comes because of the rapid exponential change of tech. A quick example is, if you take 30 steps linearly, you get to 30. If you take 30 steps exponentially, you get to 1 billion in the same amount of steps. So in the last 25 years, 30, 40 years, we've gone from a smartphone we've gone from a supercomputer that was half a building in size to a device in your pocket that is 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful. And that's not stopping. And that's going to affect every industry, because everything is becoming an information technology. Biology is becoming an information technology. It's going to disrupt healthcare. We're going to manipulate our genes. We're going to merge with AI. Nanotechnology, which turns matter into a programmable medium, manipulating atoms at the level. I mean, we're just going to see a world that is more and more disrupted, and billion-dollar companies are going to disappear, but billion-dollar companies are going to be born. And people are scared. I think one of the jobs that's the highest number of people in this country that drive trucks, right? Yeah. So we already know that self-driving cars exist. If you think for a second that that's not going to replace everybody that's driving, like you're thinking the wrong thing. I mean, it's going to happen and it's going to be disruptive. I think what technologists don't always think about is the social consequences of a species that maybe is not ready to assimilate the speed of these changes. And that's why it's very important to teach people about exponential thinking.
That's also government's job, in my opinion. Not to get too deep into that. That's the government's job to think about the social effect of that. And they're not doing that great of a job of that. I mean, Stephen Mnuchin just said yesterday that he doesn't think that technology or automation will be a big deal until 50 or 100 years. And everybody else is like, no, it's like 5.
Well, he's not thinking exponentially, perhaps. Yeah. That's the thing, is we have this linear lens which makes us future blind, which makes our intuition about when things are going to happen be completely erroneous, because we're not thinking exponentially. And I agree. I don't think the government is doing a very good job at making people understand the nature of information technology and why it's disrupting every industry. In fact, what they do is they try to get people excited about some golden age when things were better in the past, when the truth be told, in spite of these disruptions, in spite of the anxiety in the media, the world has never been better. The world is more peaceful now than it's ever been in all of human history. The chances of a man dying at the hands of another man today are the lowest than they've ever been in all of human history. By every measurable indicator that you can imagine, quality of life across the world has gone up. I mean, yes, it's a problem when parts of the world see, the middle class is being affected. That is a problem. But it also means that somewhere else in the world, hundreds of millions of people have suddenly come into the middle class for the first time. Net gain for the planet, if it's strictly numbers we're talking about. But of course, people don't think globally. They think only about their tribe or their nation state or their America first or whatever it may be. We need to think, I think, beyond borders. I think we need to think globally. I think here's what we need to do. We need to employ virtual reality, okay, and maybe psychedelics to give everybody the astronaut overview effect. You guys know the astronaut overview effect?
What's the astronaut overview
So it's the psychological condition, a kind of mystical experience that tends to occur to astronauts when they go into orbit for the first time. It's an ontological awakening. It's a forceful reckoning with what is. Your world shifts when you see the Earth from orbit. It shifts, right? You realize that it's one marble that we're all living in the middle of a cosmic infinite nothing. And so that makes your priorities shift. That extends your compassion. It extends your line of sight, right? That quote that says, empathy rarely extends beyond your line of sight. But when you see the whole Earth, trust me, you care about the whole planet. And so if we could tweak individual people's consciousnesses in a massive way, I think we could change the world and change society. In fact, Stanford recently and some other institutions have done research on these kind of transformative experiences. Awe, for example. So they describe awe as an experience of such perceptual expansion, such perceptual vastness, like the astronaut overview effect, like the birth of a child, like seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time.
Like the first time I took mushrooms.
There you go. The point being, you're forced to reconfigure your mental maps of the world. Like we all go into the world with these pre-existing mental maps that we form when we're little kids. And as the world gets more limited, as we get more disappointments and frustrations in our lives, our world shrinks. And eventually, we're the been-theres and done-thats of the adult mind. We become completely cynical and jaded. And it turns out that these awe experiences that blow us open, this opiated adjacency, as they call it, they crack us open, and the sun can get in, the light can get in. And if we could turn this passing illumination into abiding light, like we'd be in a good place. The point being, when you experience a state of awe, you are left with increased feelings of well-being, increased feelings of compassion, increased feelings of creativity. Like, the net gain, the cognitive benefits are clear. Blowing our own minds is good for us. It's why people go to Burning Man. It's a sort of secular transcendence. I mean, people are hungry. We become more scientific and more rational, but the religious impulse, the desire for the transcendent, the desire to connect with something larger than ourselves that fills our life with purpose persists. And we need to find a way of giving people that in a way that increases their compassion and their willingness to extend their hands towards one another. And if we did that, the world would be a much better place because we have the tools to address all the grand challenges of humanity. But it takes a change in consciousness. And I don't want to come across as like some hippie psychedelic philosopher or anything like that, but the science is there. You give people radical decentering experiences and you change their consciousness. You become a nicer, kinder, gentler person. And if we had more of that, and then that could infuse our politics, oh my God, like we'd be in a much better place. And then we can really get excited about like exploring the universe and shit.
Let's take some questions from the audience. There you go. Give it up, guys. Right here.
Hey, Jason.
Hi.
So my question is about creativity and how organizing and executing on the many great ideas that flow in. Yes. Sometimes it feels like it's nonstop, and how that relates to the reinforcement and pleasure that dopamine provides us. So, I mean, when it's a nonstop flow of ideas and the gates are just open, and you are in that state of awe, and it's an everyday thing. I mean, how do you personally organize your ideas, whether it's for television, for a book, or whatever it may be? I mean, sometimes it feels like our fingers can't catch up to all the ideas that are just appearing all at once. Yeah.
There's that great line by Timothy Leary. He says, create when you're high, edit when you're sober, so you can vet yourself.
I think Hemingway says the same thing about drinking. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Write when you're drunk, edit when you're sober.
Yeah, exactly. So I might have butchered the quote. But so, no, here's what I would recommend. I would recommend checking out the book Stealing Fire by Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheal. They're the founders of the Flow Genome Project, which is teaching people how to get into these flow states. And these guys have given lectures at Google. They've talked to the Navy, and they cite examples about how this like elusive flow state is associated with increasing and optimizing your performance. Like whether you're a snowboarder or a jazz musician or a Navy SEAL, this elusive flow states, this switch as they call it, is what everybody's after, and you can learn to cultivate it. There are flow triggers. You know, it's a state of consciousness in which you feel your best and you perform your best. And yes, you get a hit of dopamine, you get a hit of serotonin, you get a hit of norepinephrine. I mean, you get a lot of biochemistry that makes you more resourceful, and it gets rid of what my friend Jamie Wheal calls the cul-de-sacs and error messages, the freaking self-doubt that's normally holding us back, right? What is psychosis except neurosis pushed to its extreme, right? So a flow state is characterized by the following characteristics: selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. The acronym is called STIR. So you get out of yourself, wow, freedom from my inner nagging voice, right? You get out of time, so the oppressive tyranny of the passing moment disappears, and you're in the eternal now. You're in the forever box. There's a sense of richness. You're getting high-definition download of ideas, revelation, gratitude, grace, and bliss. And then finally, there's this effortlessness, right? It's so easy. It feels like, what have I been like laboring to climb this mountain for? I just had to get myself in the zone, and it would have been so easy. So yeah, cultivating flow states, and I would definitely recommend checking out that book. And remember that line from the movie Black Swan, when the choreographer is telling Natalie Portman, you know, you're great at the white swan. You have discipline, you put effort in, you work hard. I mean, you're super in control as the white swan. But the black swan has to submit, has to let go, has to surrender, has to realize that everything you want is on the other side of fear. And finally, he tells her, perfection is not just about control, it's also about letting go. So you have to be able to do both. Control is the planning, the getting enough sleep, the getting enough blood sugar in your system. You know, it's the discipline. It's making sure you have the pen and paper with you when you get in the zone. But then letting go means submit, let go, surprise yourself, go beyond yourself, go in spite of yourself. Get into a state of ecstasis, which literally means moving beside and beyond yourself.
Next question. Ooh, sorry.
Hi. So before starting college, I didn't know what to do. I already graduated, so I'm done with that. Yeah. My question is, how young were you, and when was the moment that you realized that you wanted to study philosophy and go farther into that?
Yeah, I was really lucky because my mom teaches literature in high school, and she's like the teacher they make movies about, you know? Like, open your mind. Minds are like parachutes. They only function when open. Question authority. Resist dogma. I mean, that's the mother I had. And all my friends, like, would come over to my house, maybe intoxicated, maybe not, to look at my mom's art. I mean, so I grew up in an environment that already celebrated philosophy, big ideas, chasing your dreams. The only rule was you have to be kind. If you are kind, there is no other thing that you have to really abide by. So go forth, you know? And I think for me, having that encouragement and having that support on her behalf just kind of made me feel like I had a cushion no matter what. I could take any risk. I mean, like, who studies philosophy and film and decides they want to make, like, did you? Thank you. And look, you're here now with me. So, but yeah, I mean, and, you know, my dad was a little bit more serious. He was like, don't lose sight of your North Star, son. You know, the world is hard. It's a very competitive world out there, you know. But he doesn't tell me that anymore. But, like, you know, so I tried to find a balance between those two things.
Next question. Who's right there?
Hey, Jason.
Hey, buddy.
I have a question in regards to the phrase that you said, the been there and done that.
Yeah.
When's the last time that you personally experienced something of complete uniqueness and something that was completely different and singular? In essence, a moment of awe that you experienced yourself?
The dream ballet at the end of La La Land.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I mean, that made me cry my freaking eyes out. It touched a nerve. It, like, reminded me of all my anxiety relating to impermanence and regret and what might have been and what could have been and what should have been. And it's just like, before that, I would say that Cameron Crowe is probably the most effective director at capturing the happy sad. I mean, notice the end of Vanilla Sky, for example. But when I saw the end of La La Land, I was like, I mean, it was like heroin for melancholy. You know? Oh, my God. Probably when I watched the movie Arrival, also, the whole meditation on language and how, like, language can structure our ideas about past, present, and future.
And how tragedy can construct our ideas about past, present, and future.
Also.
That's what I really got into that film. That, like, we're never really over tragedy,
Never.
and it is always affecting
Completely.
whichever stage of life that
Yeah.
we're in. You know, I
Completely.
love that element of that film.
Yeah, I mean, that film was brilliant. I wish they made more metaphysical science fiction. That's my favorite kind of genre, where the journey into outer space becomes a metaphor for the journey into inner space, the mind-expanding head trip into space. You know, when we dream of space, we really dream about ourselves and what we might become.
The journey in outer space isn't about evil aliens that we
No.
have to blow up, or
I mean,
you know.
some people enjoy that. That's fine. But
Sure, it's fun,
I
but
like
it's
the
nice
metaphysical
to
head
see-
trip. Yeah. I also, if you want, like, constant awe and, like, mental brain crack for the thinking mind, check out the Nerd Writer on YouTube. So the Nerd Writer is probably my favorite YouTuber ever. He does video essays, so, like, 10-minute long meditations, a lot on film, which I love, but also on art and ideas. And the guy is brilliant, Evan Pushak, the Nerd Writer. Check him out.
Well, Jason, I got to let you go. How can people tune into Origins, The Journey of Humankind?
So Origins is Monday nights at 9 p.m. on the National Geographic Channel. Make sure you tune in, guys. I appreciate your support. And we're rolling out the series internationally now as well in 171 countries. So tell your friends, spread on social media. Origins, The Journey of Humankind on National Geographic. And if you want to continue the conversation with me, I'm very active on my Facebook page. So look for Jason Silva, and you can see my videos and chat with me, and we'll have fun.
Jason Silva, everybody.